Hey everyone, welcome back to the Vocabulary Breakthrough Podcast. I'm Lilly, and honestly, I'm so thrilled you're tuning in today because what we're about to dive into is going to completely change the way you think about learning English. Before we jump in, I want to make sure you're subscribed to this podcast so you never miss an episode. Head over to your podcast app and hit that subscribe button. Also, make sure to check out our full podcast playlist where you'll find all our episodes organized by topic. Share this episode with anyone who's struggling with remembering English words because trust me, you're about to learn some absolute game changers. All right, let's get started. So here's the thing. I talk to English learners every single day, and there's one problem that comes up more than any other. It's this frustrating cycle where you learn a word, you use it once or twice, and then, boom, it just vanishes from your brain like it never existed. You know that feeling, right? You hear a word like persistent. In the moment, it totally makes sense. Someone says, she's persistent in her efforts, and you think, okay, I got this. I understand it completely. But then next week, someone asks you to use that word in a sentence, and your mind goes completely blank. It's not because you're not smart. It's not because you don't have a good memory. It's because you're missing one crucial ingredient, and that ingredient is the right technique. The strategy you use to learn matters way more than how hard you try. Let me ask you this. Have you ever learned a word just by reading it once? Maybe you saw it in a textbook or someone told you what it means and you thought that was enough? The problem is that your brain doesn't work that way. When you only encounter a word one time in one context, your brain treats it like temporary information. It's like you're storing it in your short-term memory, not your long-term memory. And we all know short-term memory doesn't stick around. Your brain needs multiple exposures to that word in different situations before it decides, okay, this is important. I should keep this. Think about it this way. When you learn a word, you need to see it, you need to hear it, you need to say it out loud yourself, and most importantly, you need to use it in meaningful ways that connect to your actual life. That's when your brain says, this matters, this is worth remembering. Let me give you an example that might hit home. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and you need to schedule a medical appointment. You call the office and the receptionist says, we have an opening on Thursday at 2 p.m. Can you make that appointment? You say yes, you understand what's happening, and you mark it on your calendar. But here's the interesting part. You understand that word appointment because you're using it in a real situation. It's connected to something that matters to you. You're not just learning the definition. You're not just memorizing the word. You're experiencing it. You're living it. And that experience, that's what makes it stick in your memory. That's the secret that most traditional English courses won't tell you. They focus on memorization and repetition, but what you really need is connection and context. Okay, so let's talk about how your brain actually learns new vocabulary. This is super important because once you understand this, you can work with your brain instead of against it. Your brain is basically a connection-making machine. It doesn't work in isolation. It doesn't learn one word, put it in a box, and forget about everything else. Instead, it builds networks. It creates patterns. It links new information to things you already know. When you learn a new word in isolation, your brain doesn't know what to do with it. But when you learn that same word alongside related words in a story with emotions attached, your brain immediately starts creating connections. And those connections, that's what makes memory stick. Let me show you what I mean. Instead of just learning the word hospital, let me give you a whole network of related words. Doctor, nurse, patient, medicine, surgery, waiting room, appointment, emergency, ambulance. See how these words all connect to the same concept? Now, when you learn all of these words together, your brain doesn't treat them as separate pieces of information. Instead, it creates this interconnected web. The word hospital becomes a hub, and all these other words are connected to it. And when your brain has multiple connections to a concept, remembering that information becomes so much easier. This is why thematic learning is incredibly powerful. Instead of just learning random words from a vocabulary list, organize your learning around topics or situations. If you're learning about food, learn all the words related to food at the same time. Ingredients, cooking methods, kitchen tools, flavors, textures. Let me give you a realistic example. Let's say you're learning vocabulary about shopping. Here are the words you might encounter: customer, cashier, receipt, change, discount, coupon, checkout, payment, credit card, refund. Now imagine I tell you a short story that uses all of these words. I went to the store yesterday to buy some clothes. I found a nice sweater with a discount tag. I also had a coupon for an extra 20% off. When I got to the checkout, the cashier scanned my items. The total was $50, but with my coupon and discount, I only paid $30. I used my credit card for payment. The cashier gave me my receipt and a small bag. I was so happy with the deal that I decided to buy another pair of jeans. See what happened there? You encountered every single one of those words in a natural, realistic story. You didn't just see the word, you saw it being used. You understood why it was being used. And because the story made sense, because it followed a logical sequence, your brain could understand the relationships between the words. That's incredibly more powerful than just reading a list of vocabulary words with definitions. This is the difference between surface-level learning and deep learning. Let me tell you why stories are such powerful tools for learning vocabulary. When you read or listen to a story, your brain doesn't just process the words. It actually creates mental images. It engages your emotions. It activates multiple parts of your brain simultaneously. Think about the last time you watched a movie or read a book that really captured your attention. You probably remember specific scenes, specific dialogues, specific emotions you felt. That's because stories activate your in powerful ways. And when you use stories to learn vocabulary, something magical happens. The words become part of the narrative. They're not standalone definitions anymore. They're part of a sequence of events. They serve a purpose. They contribute to the overall meaning. Let me give you a concrete example. Instead of just learning the word persistent, let me tell you a story. There was a woman named Sarah who wanted to become a professional athlete, but she faced a lot of obstacles. She didn't have much money to train. She didn't have access to the best equipment. She didn't even have people supporting her decision. But here's what made Sarah special. She was persistent. Every single day, no matter what happened, she woke up and trained. When she felt tired, she pushed through. When people told her she was wasting her time, she ignored them. When she failed, she got back up and tried again. That persistence, that determination, that refusal to give up, that's what eventually made her succeed. Years later, she became an Olympic athlete. Now, do you see the difference? When you hear the word persistent in this story, you don't just know the definition. You understand what it looks like in real life. You understand what it feels like to be persistent. You have a character and a journey associated with that word. And here's the beautiful part. If someone asks you to use that word in a sentence next week, you don't have to think hard. You immediately remember Sarah's story. You immediately know what the word means and how to use it. This is why I always recommend that when you're learning new vocabulary, you should ask yourself, can I imagine this word in a story? Can I see it being used in a real situation? If the answer is yes, then you're learning in a way that will stick. But there's another layer to this, and this is something that takes storytelling to a whole new level. When you actually create your own story using new vocabulary words, that's when the real learning happens. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you've learned 5 new words today: ambitious, setback, determination, breakthrough, and resilience. Instead of just reviewing these words separately, I want you to write a short story using all 5 words. You might write something like, Tom had an ambitious goal. He wanted to start his own business by age 25, but he faced a huge setback when his first startup failed and he lost all his savings. Instead of giving up, Tom showed real determination. He studied business more carefully, learned from his mistakes, and tried again. 2 years later, he had a major breakthrough when his second startup got funding from investors. That experience taught him the true meaning of resilience. See what you just did? You didn't just memorize 5 words, you created a narrative that shows how these words relate to each other. You used them in context. You showed their relationships and how they apply in real situations. And because you created it yourself, because it came from your own mind, it's going to stick with you way better than if you just read it. This is called generative learning, and it's one of the most powerful techniques in educational psychology. When you generate your own examples, your own stories, your own sentences, you engage your brain in a completely different way than when you just receive information passively. Okay, now let me introduce you to 2 concepts that are going to revolutionize how you study vocabulary. These are called active recall and spaced repetition. And honestly, if you master these 2 techniques alone, your vocabulary will improve dramatically. Let's start with active recall. This is the idea that instead of passively reviewing information, you actively try to retrieve it from your memory. It's the difference between reading a definition and trying to remember the definition without looking at it. Here's why this matters. When you just read information over and over again, your brain gets lazy. It thinks, oh, I've seen this before. I know what this says. I don't need to really remember it. But when you actively try to retrieve information, your brain has to work hard. It has to search through your memory and pull out that information. And you know what? That effort, that's actually what makes memory stronger. It's counterintuitive, but struggling to remember something makes you remember it better than if it's easy. Let me give you a practical example of how to use active recall. Let's say I give you a sentence that uses a vocabulary word you're trying to learn. The CEO made an impulsive decision to invest all the company's money in a risky project without consulting anyone else. Now, instead of me telling you what impulsive means, I'm going to ask you to guess based on context. What do you think impulsive means? Can you infer the meaning from how it's being used in this sentence? Take a moment. Think about it. The CEO made this decision without consulting anyone, without thinking it through, without planning. Based on that, what would you guess impulsive means? If you guessed something like doing something without thinking about it first, or acting on sudden feeling without planning, you'd be exactly right. And here's the magic. By actively trying to retrieve that meaning, by struggling a little bit, you've actually created a much stronger memory of that word than if I just told you the definition. This is why I always encourage people to try to figure out word meanings from context first, before looking up the definition. Yes, sometimes you'll get it wrong. But getting it wrong and then correcting yourself, that's actually more powerful for learning than getting it right immediately. Now let's talk about the second technique, which is spaced repetition. This is about timing. It's about how often you review information and how you space out those reviews. Most students make this mistake. They learn a new word on Monday. They review it 10 times on Monday. They review it 5 times on Tuesday. And then they never look at it again. And guess what happens? By Thursday, it's gone from their memory. But here's what actually works. Learn a new word on Monday. Review it once on Monday. Review it again on Wednesday. Review it again on Saturday. Review it again the following Wednesday. And then review it one more time 3 weeks later. This spacing out of reviews is incredibly powerful because each time you come back to review a word after some time has passed, your brain has to work a little harder to retrieve it, and that retrieval effort strengthens the memory. The timing is based on something called the forgetting curve, which is a concept from cognitive psychology. Basically, we forget information pretty quickly after we learn it. But every time we review that information, before we completely forget it, we reset the forgetting curve, and we can go longer before needing to review again. So instead of spending an hour reviewing the same 5 words on one day, spend 10 minutes reviewing them on day 1, then 10 minutes on day 3, then 10 minutes on day 7, then 10 minutes on day 14. That distributed practice is way more effective than massed practice. And here's how you can implement this practically. When you learn a new word, write it down. Put a date next to it. Then schedule when you're going to review it. 2 days later, review it. A week later, review it again. 3 weeks later, review it one more time. If you're learning 10 new words per week, then you should have a system where every day you're reviewing some words you learned recently, some words you learned a few weeks ago, and some words you learned months ago. This keeps everything fresh in your memory without overwhelming you. And here's the beautiful part. Once you've reviewed a word several times over several weeks, you don't need to review it anymore. It's become part of your long-term memory. It's yours to keep. Now, let me teach you a technique that's going to help you learn words faster and remember them better. It's about understanding word relationships. And specifically, I want to talk about synonyms, antonyms, and word families. When you learn a new word, don't learn it in isolation. Learn it alongside related words. This creates a network in your brain, and networks are so much stronger than isolated pieces of information. Let's start with synonyms. A synonym is a word that has a similar meaning. For example, the words happy, joyful, and delighted are all synonyms. They have slightly different nuances, slightly different contexts where you'd use them, but they're all related to the same basic emotion. When you're learning vocabulary, take time to explore synonyms. If you learn the word happy, also learn joyful, cheerful, content, satisfied, and thrilled. Understand the subtle differences between them. Content is a quieter kind of happiness. Thrilled is an excited kind of happiness. And then use these words in sentences that show their differences. After a long day of work, I felt content sitting on my couch with a cup of tea. I was thrilled when I found out I got the job. She seemed cheerful despite having a difficult week. See how each word is used slightly differently? That nuance, that distinction, that's what makes your vocabulary rich and sophisticated. Now let's talk about antonyms, which are words with opposite meanings. If you learn the word generous, also learn stingy. If you learn confident, also learn insecure. If you learn patient, also learn impatient. The reason this is powerful is that it clarifies meaning through contrast. When you understand what a word is not, you understand what it is much better. And again, learning these pairs together creates a network of connections in your brain. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're learning vocabulary related to emotions. Instead of just learning individual emotion words, organize them by contrast. Happy versus sad, calm versus anxious, brave versus fearful, energetic versus tired, motivated versus discouraged. Now, create sentences for each pair that show the contrast. The sunny weather made me feel happy, but hearing the bad news made me feel sad. After taking a walk, I felt calm and peaceful, but before the presentation, I felt anxious and nervous. The brave firefighter rushed into the burning building, while the fearful dog hid under the bed. When you learn words in these contrasting pairs, you're not just learning twice as many words. You're actually understanding them more deeply because you're seeing how they relate to each other and how they differ. There's another type of word relationship that's incredibly useful, and that's word families. This is when words share the same root but have different forms. For example, the word happy can become happiness, unhappy, happily, unhappily. When you learn a word, take a few minutes to explore its family. What are all the different forms of this word? What parts of speech can it become? This helps you understand word patterns, and once you understand patterns, you can apply them to other words too. Let me show you what I mean. Let's take the word create. The word family might look like this: create, creative, creativity, creator, creation, recreate, recreational. Now use each of these in a sentence. She wants to create a new product. He has a very creative mind. Her creativity is inspiring. He's the creator of this amazing app. That painting is a beautiful creation. We like to recreate our favorite recipes at home. We spent the weekend doing recreational activities. See what's happening here? You're not just learning one word, you're learning an entire system. You're understanding how English works. You're understanding how words can be transformed and adapted. And this understanding is going to make it so much easier to learn new words in the future because you'll recognize these patterns. Let me introduce you to one of my favorite techniques for learning vocabulary, and it's especially powerful for abstract words that are hard to visualize. It's called visualization, or creating mental images. Here's the thing about abstract words like determination, courage, or resilience. These words don't have a physical form. You can't take a picture of them. So how do you create a memory for them? You create a mental image. Here's the thing about abstract words like determination, courage, or resilience. These words don't have a physical form. You can't take a picture of them. So how do you create a memory for them? You create a mental image. But they keep going. Their jaw is clenched. Their eyes are focused on the summit. They don't look to the left or to the right. They just keep going. That image, that mental picture, that's what determined means to me. And here's the magical part. Every time I encounter the word determined in the future, that image comes back to me. It's not just a definition anymore. It's a vivid sensory memory. This technique is incredibly powerful, and you can use it for almost any word. Let me give you more examples. For the word persistent, I imagine someone knocking on a door over and over again, not giving up even when no one answers. For the word meticulous, I imagine someone carefully arranging flowers in a vase, making sure each one is placed perfectly. For the word chaotic, I imagine a classroom where papers are flying everywhere, children are running around, and nothing is organized. These mental images might seem silly, but they're incredibly effective because our brains are visual creatures. We remember images much better than we remember words or definitions. This is why movies are so memorable. This is why you can remember scenes from movies you watched years ago. It's because they created vivid visual experiences in your mind. Now, here's something that makes visualization even more powerful. When the mental image is exaggerated, funny, or emotionally charged, it sticks even better. So don't just create a normal mental image, create an exaggerated one. For the word abundant, don't just imagine a garden with a lot of flowers. Imagine a garden where there are flowers everywhere. Flowers covering the ground, flowers hanging from the trees, flowers floating in the air, flowers as far as you can see in every direction. Make it ridiculous. Make it exaggerated. Make your brain go, wow, that's a lot of flowers. Because that exaggeration is what makes the memory stick. For the word scarce, don't just imagine a place where there are a few things. Imagine a desert where you can see for miles and there's nothing, just sand and emptiness. No plants, no water, no animals, nothing, just emptiness stretching as far as you can see. The more vivid, more exaggerated, more emotionally engaging your mental image, the better you'll remember the word. This is a proven technique in memory research. It's called the bizarreness effect, and it shows that unusual, surprising, or humorous images are remembered better than normal, everyday images. So when you're learning new vocabulary, especially abstract words, take a moment to create a mental image. Make it vivid, make it exaggerated, make it funny if you can, and then every time you encounter that word, bring up that image again. Watch how much more effectively you remember that word. Now, I want to share with you something that might be the most important technique for long-term vocabulary retention. It's about connecting words to your personal life, to your actual experiences and routines. Here's the fundamental principle. Your brain remembers things that are personally meaningful way better than things that feel abstract or disconnected. If you learn a word that relates to your job, your hobbies, your relationships, or your daily routines, you're going to remember it much better than if you learn a random word from a vocabulary list. Let me give you an example. Let's say you work in marketing. You probably need vocabulary related to marketing. Audience, demographic, engagement, conversion, analytics, metrics, campaign, budget, ROI. These words aren't just random words to you. They're connected to your actual work. They're connected to your paycheck. They're connected to your career goals. Because of that personal connection, because those words are relevant to your life, you're going to remember them more naturally. You'll encounter them regularly. You'll use them in real conversations with your colleagues. You'll read them in emails and documents. So here's what I want you to do. Instead of approaching English learning as something separate from your actual life, integrate it into your actual life. Learn vocabulary that's relevant to your specific situation. If you're a teacher, learn education vocabulary, curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, differentiation, engagement, motivation. If you're a parent, learn parenting vocabulary, discipline, patience, development, milestone, behavior, nurturing. If you have a specific hobby or interest, learn vocabulary related to that. If you love cooking, learn food vocabulary. Sauté, dice, simmer, marinate, emulsion, reduction. If you love sports, learn sports vocabulary. Endurance, agility, strategy, formation, momentum. The beautiful thing about this approach is that you're not forcing yourself to learn random words. You're learning words that you actually need and want to use. And that motivation, that relevance, that's what makes learning stick. Now, here's a practical exercise you can do today. Think about your daily routine. Write down all the activities you do in a typical day. Wake up, shower, get dressed, eat breakfast, commute to work, have meetings, eat lunch, work on projects, commute home, make dinner, spend time with family, watch TV, go to bed. Now, for each of these activities, think about the vocabulary associated with them. For waking up, you might have words like alarm, groggy, stretch, yawn, refresh. For showering, you might have words like steam, shampoo, conditioner, lather, rinse, invigorating. Create sentences for each activity using vocabulary that's relevant to your actual life. My alarm went off at 7 a.m. and I had to drag myself out of bed because I was feeling groggy. I love the feeling of hot water on my skin in the morning. The steam clears my mind and makes me feel refreshed. Let me give you another powerful way to connect vocabulary to your life. Keep a daily journal in English. You don't need to write a long journal entry. Even just 5 to 10 minutes a day is powerful. And as you write, focus on using new vocabulary that you've been learning. For example, if you've been learning words related to emotions, write about how you felt during the day. If you've been learning words related to activities, write about what you did. If you've been learning words related to descriptions, use them to describe the people you encountered or the places you visited. This does two things. First, it gives you a chance to use the new vocabulary in a realistic, meaningful context. Second, it creates a record that you can go back and review. You can read your journal entries from a week ago and see how you've been using the vocabulary. I want to talk about something that often gets overlooked in vocabulary learning, and that's pronunciation. Many language learners focus only on reading and writing, but speaking is absolutely crucial for memory, and it all starts with correct pronunciation. Here's what happens in your brain when you say a word out loud. You're engaging multiple sensory systems. You're hearing the word, you're feeling the word as it comes out of your mouth. Your brain is processing the motor movements needed to produce the word, and all of these different sensory experiences create a much richer, more detailed memory than if you just read the word silently. Think about it this way. If I ask you to remember a word you've only read, you might have difficulty. But if I ask you to remember a word you've pronounced out loud multiple times, you'll remember it instantly. So here's what I want you to do with every new word you learn. First, make sure you know how to pronounce it. If you're not sure, use an online dictionary like Google Translate or Merriam-Webster that has audio pronunciation. Listen to the pronunciation. Listen carefully, maybe even listen a few times. Then, say the word out loud yourself. Don't be shy about it. Don't whisper it. Actually, say it out loud so you can hear yourself saying it. Your brain needs to hear both the correct pronunciation and your own voice attempting the pronunciation. Then say it a few more times. Really let your mouth get comfortable with the sounds. For some words, especially words with difficult sounds, you might need to practice pronunciation more than others. Let me show you an example. Let's take the word comfortable. Now, this is a word that a lot of English learners mispronounce because of the spelling. Some people try to pronounce every letter like comfortable, but native speakers actually say it more like comfortable. The A in the second syllable is actually a schwa sound, which is a neutral vowel sound. So listen carefully. Comfortable, comfortable. See how the second syllable isn't pronounced as for, it's more like a quick fur sound. And the last syllable isn't bull, it's more like bull. Now you try. Say it out loud. Comfortable, comfortable. Again, comfortable. Feel how your mouth moves. Feel the rhythm of the word. Once you've said it a few times, it becomes much more real to you. Now, use it in a sentence. I really want to find a comfortable chair for my living room. Say that sentence out loud. And pay attention to how the word sounds in context, with the words before and after it. This is called natural pronunciation in context, and it's much more useful than just pronouncing isolated words. Because in real life, you don't speak in isolated words. You speak in sentences, in conversations, in natural speech. Here's another example. The word colleague. Now, this word trips up a lot of learners because it has that unusual egg ending. The pronunciation is colleague, like coal plus eeg. The stress is on the first syllable. Colleague. 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 Now use it in a sentence. I work with a wonderful colleague named Sarah. Colleague. Feel how it rolls off your tongue when you practice it in context. Now here's something that takes pronunciation to the next level, and it's called shadowing. Shadowing means you listen to someone speak English and you repeat what they say immediately after they say it, like you're echoing them. This is incredibly powerful because you're not just learning pronunciation, you're also learning the rhythm and intonation of English speech. You're learning how native speakers actually speak with all the natural pauses, emphasizes, and speed variations. Here's how to do it. Find a podcast, a video, or an audiobook in English. Something that you're interested in or that's not too difficult. Listen to a short segment, maybe just 1 or 2 sentences. Pause it, and then, without looking at a script, try to repeat exactly what you heard, with the same rhythm, the same intonation, the same speed. At first, this might be difficult. You might not catch every word, but that's okay. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to train your ear and your mouth to produce natural-sounding English. Do this for just 10 minutes a day, and you'll be amazed at how much your pronunciation improves. And as a bonus, you'll naturally pick up vocabulary and phrasing patterns that native speakers use. Let me introduce you to one of the most efficient ways to learn vocabulary, and it's based on a fundamental principle of how language actually works. Most of the time, we don't learn words in isolation. We learn words in context, as part of sentences and conversations. Think about how children learn language. They don't learn by studying vocabulary lists. They learn by hearing words used in sentences, in conversations, in stories. They learn the word milk because they hear it repeatedly in context. Here's your milk. Do you want some milk? The milk is cold. And they understand it not just from the word itself, but from the context and the situation. They see milk, they touch milk, someone gives them milk, they experience milk, and through all these experiences, they learn the word. As adult language learners, we should mimic this natural learning process. Instead of learning a word and its definition, learn the word in a complete sentence. Better yet, learn it in multiple sentences. Here's the difference. Isolated learning would be to learn that resilient means able to recover quickly from difficulties. But context-based learning would be to encounter sentences like, despite facing many challenges, she remained resilient and eventually succeeded. Or, the resilient community rebuilt after the disaster. When you learn the word in these sentences, you understand not just what it means, but how it's used, what kinds of situations it appears in, what other words often appear with it. This brings me to an important concept in linguistics called collocations, which are words that frequently appear together. For example, you don't just say big and house, you say big house. You don't just say bright and future, you say bright future. These combinations are so common in English that native speakers use them automatically, and when you learn vocabulary, you should learn these collocations as well. So when you learn the word resilient, also learn the phrases that commonly go with it. Resilient community, resilient person, remain resilient, show resilience. By learning these phrases, you're learning how the word is actually used in real English. Here's a practical method you can use. When you encounter a new word in reading or listening, Don't just note down the word and its definition. Instead, write down the entire sentence where the word appears. This sentence becomes your context for understanding and remembering that word. For example, if you encounter the word meticulous in the sentence, "She's meticulous about her work, checking every detail multiple times," write down that entire sentence. Don't just write meticulous, very careful about details. Then, when you review this word later, you'll have the context. You'll remember how it was used. You'll remember the sentence structure, and you'll be much more likely to remember the word correctly. Let me give you another powerful technique called the sentence method for learning vocabulary. For each new word, create a sentence that is personally meaningful to you. And the sentence should be something you can imagine actually saying in real life. For example, if you're learning the word procrastinate, instead of just learning the definition, create a sentence like, "I tend to procrastinate on important projects until the last minute." This sentence is real. It's something you could actually say. And because it's connected to your real life, you'll remember it better. Or if you're learning the word meticulous, create a sentence like, "My mother is meticulous about keeping the house clean." Again, this is a real sentence that you could actually use in conversation. The beauty of this method is that you're creating examples that matter to you. And when examples matter, when they're relevant and realistic, your brain pays more attention. Your brain says, "This is important. This is something I might actually need to use." When you combine context-based learning with sentence-based learning, you create a system that's incredibly efficient. You're not just learning isolated words, you're learning words in the context where they're actually used, in sentence patterns that you might actually produce. All right, I want to teach you a technique that I call the group power technique, and it's based on something that cognitive psychology research has shown over and over again. When you learn related items together as a group, you remember them better than when you learn them separately. Here's the basic idea. Instead of learning 5 random words, learn 5 words that belong to the same category or semantic field, all related to health, all related to emotions, all related to business, all related to travel. When you learn related words as a group, your brain can see the relationships between them. It can create a mental organization. It can understand how they fit together. And that understanding makes memory much stronger. Let me show you a concrete example. Let's say you want to learn vocabulary related to a restaurant experience. Instead of learning these words randomly, organize them into categories. The people: server, chef, cook, host, bartender. The location: table, booth, counter, dining room, kitchen. The actions: serve, order, pay, tip, cook, taste. The descriptors: delicious, fresh, seasoned, crispy, tender. Now, when you learn these words, you learn them as a group, and you learn them in relation to each other. The server works in the dining room. The chef works in the kitchen. The cook prepares the food. The server serves the food. See how each word has a clear role and relationship to the others? This organization in your mind makes the words so much more memorable. Here's a practical way to use this technique. Create categories for different topics that are relevant to your life. One category might be words for my job. Another might be words for my hobbies. Another might be words for social situations. For each category, collect 5 to 10 words that belong to that category. Then, spend a week or 2 really focusing on that one category. Learn these words deeply, use them in sentences, create stories with them, practice them in context. Then move on to the next category, but continue reviewing the previous category using spaced repetition. Over time, you'll build a rich vocabulary organized around categories that matter to you. Let me give you another powerful variation of this technique. Create a story or scenario that uses multiple words from the same group. This forces you to see how the words work together and interact in a realistic situation. For example, using the restaurant vocabulary we talked about earlier, last night I went to my favorite Italian restaurant. The host greeted me warmly and seated me at a table in the dining room. The server came by quickly and gave me a menu. I ordered pasta, which the chef had prepared specially that night. It was absolutely delicious, with fresh ingredients and a perfectly seasoned sauce. The cook had really outdone himself. After the meal, the server brought the check. I paid the bill and left a generous tip because the service was excellent. See how all the vocabulary works together naturally in this context? The people, the locations, the actions, the descriptors, they all appear in a realistic scenario where they make sense together. This is so much more powerful than learning individual words. You're learning how these words function in a real-world context. You're understanding the relationships between them. You're seeing how they're used together in actual English. Now, I want to talk about something that might seem surprising, but it's actually one of the most powerful factors in memory, and that's emotion. Your brain remembers things that trigger strong emotions way better than things that are neutral or boring. Think about your own experience. Can you remember a scary movie you watched? Can you remember a funny moment with friends? Can you remember an embarrassing situation? I bet you can remember these vividly. And why? Because they triggered strong emotions. And here's the beautiful thing. You can leverage this emotional power when learning vocabulary. Instead of learning words in a boring, neutral way, connect them to emotions. Here's how to do it. When you learn a new word, especially if it's an adjective that describes an emotion or a feeling, think about a time when you felt that way. Really visualize it. Remember the details. Remember what you saw, what you heard, what you felt in your body. For example, let's say you're learning the word nervous. Don't just learn the definition. Instead, think about a time when you felt nervous. Maybe it was before an important presentation. You felt your heart beating faster. You felt butterflies in your stomach. Your palms were sweaty. Your voice might have shaken. Now, when someone uses the word nervous, your brain doesn't just retrieve a definition. It retrieves that memory, that emotional experience. And that memory is so much more powerful than a simple definition. Let me give you more examples. For the word exhilarated, think about a time when you felt that rush of excitement and energy. Maybe it was when you accomplished something difficult. Maybe it was after a good workout. Maybe it was when you heard good news. For the word frustrated, think about a time when you couldn't do something you wanted to do, when things weren't going your way, when obstacles blocked your progress. For the word content, by connecting emotions to the words you're learning, you create memories that are incredibly durable. Your brain says, this word is important. This word connects to something I've actually experienced. I need to remember this. Now, here's another aspect of this. Not all emotions are positive. Sometimes the most memorable experiences are challenging or difficult, and that's okay. You can use difficult emotions to remember words too. In fact, sometimes the most memorable vocabulary experiences are the ones where you make a mistake and feel a little embarrassed, and then you learn from that mistake. Because the emotional experience of getting something wrong and then correcting it actually creates a stronger memory than if you got it right the first time. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Don't be afraid of feeling uncomfortable as you stretch your vocabulary. That discomfort, that challenge, that's actually helping you learn better. And here's one more thing about emotion and memory. Humor is incredibly powerful. If you can associate a word with something funny or silly, you'll remember it much better. This is why mnemonic devices, which often use humor or absurdity, are so effective. For example, if you're learning the word ubiquitous, which means present everywhere, you might imagine a silly image of the word itself, with the letter U standing very tall, being u-big-witous, like it's everywhere being big. It's a silly image, but it sticks. Okay, let me talk about something that I call passive vocabulary absorption, which is the natural learning that happens when you read and listen to English content that you genuinely enjoy. Here's the thing. You don't have to sit down and deliberately study every single word you want to learn. In fact, some of the best vocabulary learning happens naturally when you're engaged in content that's interesting to you. When you watch a movie, read a book, listen to a podcast, or watch a YouTube video that you're interested in, you're naturally exposed to vocabulary and context. Your brain is processing language. Your brain is picking up patterns. Your brain is absorbing new words. And research shows that when you're genuinely interested in content, you learn more effectively. You pay more attention. You retain information better because your brain is engaged and motivated. So here's my recommendation. Make a point to consume English content regularly. But here's the key. Choose content that you actually want to consume, not content that you feel you should consume. If you love sports, watch sports content in English. If you love cooking, watch cooking shows in English. If you love music, listen to podcasts about music in English. If you love travel, watch travel videos in English. If you love business, read business news in English. When you're learning through content you love, it doesn't feel like studying. It feels like entertainment, and that's when real learning happens. Now, here's how to optimize your learning while consuming this content. As you watch or read, keep a notebook nearby. When you encounter a word that's unfamiliar or interesting, write it down. But don't just write the word. Write the entire sentence or phrase where the word appeared. For example, if you're watching a documentary and you hear the phrase, "The researcher conducted a meticulous analysis of the data," you might write down, "Meticulous. The researcher conducted a meticulous analysis of the data." Then, later, you can take these words and incorporate them into your active learning practice. You can look them up, understand their meanings, and practice using them. Another powerful technique is called extensive reading or listening, which means you consume large amounts of content, maybe not understanding every word, but getting the general meaning and naturally picking up vocabulary along the way. This is different from intensive reading or listening, where you study a shorter piece of text very carefully, looking up every word, understanding every detail. Both are valuable. Intensive study helps you understand deeply. Extensive consumption helps you pick up vocabulary naturally and understand how English flows. Ideally, you should do both. Here's a practical ratio that many language teachers recommend. For every hour of intensive study, you should do several hours of extensive consumption. So if you spend 30 minutes a day deliberately studying vocabulary, you should spend at least a couple hours a week consuming English content that you enjoy. This doesn't feel like work. You're watching a show you like. You're reading about a topic you're interested in. You're naturally absorbing English while having fun. And here's what's amazing. Over time, the vocabulary you encounter in your extensive consumption starts to feel familiar. The words you see in your intensive study start appearing in your content consumption. Everything connects. Everything reinforces everything else. Now, I want to share with you something that can transform the way you feel about vocabulary learning, and that's the power of making it fun through gamification. Learning vocabulary doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to feel like a chore. It can be engaging, it can be playful, it can even be fun. One simple way to do this is to turn vocabulary learning into a game. And I'm not talking about complicated games. I'm talking about simple, playful activities that engage your brain and make the learning feel less like work. Here's one of my favorite games. I call it Word Association Speed Round. Here's how it works. I say a word, and you say the first word that comes to your mind that relates to it. You're not thinking, you're not planning, you're just saying whatever comes to mind. Let me demonstrate. I say the word rain. You might say umbrella, or wet, or clouds, or puddles. I say the word coffee. You might say morning, or warm, or caffeine, or hot. This game is simple, but it's incredibly powerful for vocabulary learning. It forces you to make quick connections between words. It activates different parts of your vocabulary that you might not normally access. And it makes learning feel like a game instead of studying. Here's another game that's really fun. I call it definition charades. How it works is, you think of a word you've learned recently, and instead of saying the word or writing the definition, you act it out physically. Your partner or friend tries to guess what word you're acting out. For example, if the word is tired, you might drag your feet slowly, yawn, rub your eyes, and maybe even lie down on the floor. If the word is confused, you might scratch your head, look in different directions, wave your hands around. This sounds silly, but it's an amazing way to remember words because you're not just hearing or reading them, you're experiencing them physically. Your body is helping your brain remember. Here's another variation that's even more fun. I call it synonym storytelling. You choose a word and you try to tell a short story about someone or something using as many synonyms for that word as possible. For example, if the word is happy, you might tell a story like, Sarah was delighted when she heard the news. She felt joyful and cheerful all day long. Her family noticed she was in a wonderful mood, so they asked what had happened. When she told them, they all felt thrilled and elated too. It was a wonderful day where everyone felt pleased and see how many variations of happy you used? This forces you to think deeply about the subtle differences between synonyms. And every time you use a synonym, you're reinforcing your memory of it. Here's another game that's surprisingly effective. I call it Sentence Construction Challenge. You give yourself a time limit, maybe 10 minutes, and you try to write as many sentences as possible using words you've been learning. You don't aim for perfection, you just aim for quantity. The goal is to use as many new vocabulary words as possible. Then, if you have a language partner or a teacher, you can have them check your sentences, correct any mistakes, and give you feedback. But even if you're doing this alone, you're getting valuable practice. And here's one more game that's really powerful. I call it context prediction. You read a story or a passage, but before you read the next sentence, you try to predict what word comes next. What vocabulary word would fit well here? For example, you might read, she opened the door and saw a beautiful garden full of colorful, and you try to guess what word comes next. Flowers, plants, vegetables? This forces your brain to think about vocabulary in context and predict what makes sense. These games might seem simple, but they're incredibly effective because they engage different parts of your brain. They make learning feel less like work and more like play. And when learning feels like play, you're much more likely to stick with it consistently. Now, let me talk about something that can revolutionize your vocabulary learning. And that's building your own personal vocabulary system that works with your brain and fits into your actual life. Most people don't have a system for learning vocabulary. They just learn random words whenever they encounter them, and they hope it sticks. But having a system, having a method, having a structure, that makes all the difference. A good personal vocabulary system has a few key components. First, it has a way for you to capture new words. Second, it has a way for you to organize those words. Third, it has a way for you to review and practice them. Fourth, it connects to your actual life and goals. Let me talk about capturing new words. You need a system for writing down words you encounter. This could be a physical notebook, a digital app like Anki or Quizlet, a Google spreadsheet, whatever works for you. The important thing is that when you encounter a new word, you immediately write it down. Don't rely on your memory. Don't think, oh, I'll write it down later. Write it down immediately. And write it down with context. Write down the sentence where you encountered it. Also, if possible, write down where you learned it. Did you learn it while reading a book, listening to a podcast, watching a video? This context helps you remember the word better later. The second component is organization. Once you've captured a word, you need to organize it in some way. Some people organize by topic. Some organize by difficulty. Some organize by parts of speech. I recommend organizing by topic because it leverages the group learning technique we talked about earlier. When you're learning and reviewing, you're learning words that are related, that share semantic connections, that belong to the same conceptual field. So create categories for different topics, maybe business vocabulary, travel vocabulary, cooking vocabulary, health vocabulary, and as you capture new words, place them in the appropriate category. The third component is review and practice. This is where spaced repetition comes in. You need a regular schedule for reviewing the words you've captured. A simple system might look like this. Every day, you add 3 to 5 new words to your system. You capture them with context and organize them by topic. Then, every day, you also review words from the past few days, the past week, and the past month. Your review isn't just reading the words. Your review includes using them in new sentences, using them in conversations, creating mental images for them, teaching them to someone else. The fourth component is personal relevance. Your vocabulary system should connect to your goals, your interests, and your life. If you're studying for a test, include vocabulary that's on the test. If you're learning English for your job, include work-related vocabulary. If you have specific hobbies or interests, include vocabulary related to those. When your vocabulary learning is connected to your actual life and goals, it feels relevant, it feels important, and that motivation makes you more likely to stick with it. Let me give you a practical example of what a personal vocabulary system might look like. Let's say you're learning English because you travel frequently. Your categories might be airport and travel, hotel and accommodation, restaurants and food, shopping, emergencies and help, cultural interactions. For each category, you capture words related to that category as you learn them. You might have 10 words in airport and travel, like departure, arrival, luggage, boarding pass, customs, immigration, passenger, connection, delayed, gate. Then, when you review, you might read these 10 words and create sentences using each one. Or you might try to describe a trip you took, forcing yourself to use as many of these words as possible. And here's the beautiful part. Because your vocabulary system is organized around themes that matter to you, you can actually use this vocabulary in real situations. When you go to the airport, you see the words you learned. When you check into a hotel, you use the words you learned. When you go to a restaurant, you encounter the vocabulary you've been practicing. This real-world use reinforces your memory. It shows you how the vocabulary actually works. It gives you confidence that your learning is practical and applicable. Let me talk about some common mistakes that vocabulary learners make so you can avoid them and learn more effectively. The first mistake is learning words in isolation without context. This is so common. People see a word, they look up the definition, and they write it down, but they don't write down a sentence showing how it's used. They don't understand the context where it appears. The problem with this is that later, when you try to use the word, you're not sure how to use it correctly. You understand what it means, but you don't know how to incorporate it into a sentence naturally. The solution is to always learn words in context. Always write down a sentence or phrase showing how the word is used, and try to understand not just what the word means, but how it's used, what kinds of situations it appears in, what other words often appear with it. The second mistake is learning too many words at once. Some people get excited about vocabulary learning and try to learn 50 new words a day, but research shows that spaced learning is much more effective than massed learning. It's better to learn 5 new words a day consistently than to try to learn 50 words one day and then nothing for a week. Your brain needs regular exposure and review, not massive dumps of information all at once. The third mistake is not reviewing consistently. People learn vocabulary and then never review it. They think, I learned that word already. I don't need to review it. But that's exactly how vocabulary gets forgotten. The solution is to build regular review into your routine. Every day, spend some time reviewing words you learned previously. Use the spaced repetition method we talked about. The fourth mistake is not using new vocabulary in real situations. Some people practice vocabulary in isolation, but they never actually use it in real conversations or real writing. But using vocabulary in real situations is crucial. That's how you confirm that you can actually use the word correctly. That's how you build confidence with the word. That's how you move it from passive vocabulary, words you understand, to active vocabulary, words you can use. So make a point to actually use new vocabulary in real situations, in conversations with friends or language partners, in writing like emails or journal entries, in presentations or public speaking. The fifth mistake is giving up too quickly. Vocabulary learning is a long-term project. It takes time and consistency. Some people expect to learn a word once and remember it forever, but that's not how memory works. You need to encounter a word multiple times over multiple weeks and months before it truly becomes part of your long-term memory. If you give up after just a few days or weeks, you won't see the results you want. The solution is to have patience and trust the process. Be consistent with your vocabulary learning. Keep practicing, keep reviewing, and gradually, over time, you'll build a rich, vibrant vocabulary. The sixth mistake is not having fun with vocabulary learning. Some people treat it like a chore, something they have to do rather than something they want to do. And when something feels like a chore, it's hard to maintain motivation. The solution is to make vocabulary learning fun. Use games, use stories, use humor. Choose topics that interest you. Learn vocabulary related to your hobbies and passions. Make connections to your real life. When you enjoy the learning process, when it feels like fun rather than work, you're much more likely to stick with it long term. The seventh mistake is comparing your progress to other people's progress. You might see someone else who seems to be learning vocabulary faster than you are, and you start thinking, I'm not good at this. I'm falling behind. But everyone learns at their own pace. Everyone has different starting points. Everyone has different amounts of time and energy to invest in learning. The only comparison that matters is comparing yourself to yourself. Are you better today than you were a month ago? That's what matters. The solution is to focus on your own progress. Set realistic goals for yourself. Celebrate your improvements, no matter how small. And remember that consistency matters way more than speed. Slow, steady, consistent progress over months and years will get you to fluency. Trying to rush and cram won't. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about so many different techniques and strategies. Now, let me bring it all together and show you what a complete, practical vocabulary learning routine might look like. This is a routine that uses multiple techniques we've discussed. It's designed to be realistic and fit into a busy life. You don't need hours every day. You need focused, purposeful time using evidence-based techniques. Here's a daily routine. Spend about 30 minutes a day on focused vocabulary learning, every single day, without exception. This consistency is crucial. Here's how you structure that 30 minutes. First, spend 5 minutes reviewing words from previous weeks and months using spaced repetition. Go through your vocabulary system. Review some words you learned 2 weeks ago. Review some you learned a month ago. Review some you learned even longer ago. Don't just read the words. Test yourself. Can you remember what they mean? Can you use them in a sentence? This active recall is what strengthens memory. Second, spend 5 to 10 minutes capturing and processing new words. If you've been reading or listening to English content, write down any new words you encountered. For each new word, write down the full sentence or phrase. Look up the pronunciation. Create a mental image or association. Write down where you learned it. Third, spend 10 to 15 minutes actively practicing new words. Choose words from the recent past, maybe words you learned in the last week or two, and practice using them actively. Write sentences, create stories, have conversations, draw mental images. Say them out loud with correct pronunciation. The key is that this practice should feel like actual use, not mechanical repetition. You're not just copying out sentences. You're creating new sentences. You're thinking about how you would use these words. Now, beyond this daily 30 minutes, there's additional learning that happens passively. You should be consuming English content regularly that you enjoy, reading books, listening to podcasts, watching videos. This extensive consumption exposes you to vocabulary and context naturally. I recommend aiming for at least 1 to 2 hours of this extensive consumption per week. But honestly, if you enjoy English content, you might do much more than that. You might watch English videos or read English articles daily. Then, weekly, you should set aside time to organize and reflect on your vocabulary learning. Maybe once a week, spend 30 minutes organizing any new words you've captured into your system, creating categories, identifying patterns, reflecting on your progress. And monthly, you should do a bigger review and reflection. Look back at the past month. How many words have you learned? Which categories have grown the most? Which techniques have been most helpful for you? What adjustments do you want to make to your routine? This routine ensures that you're engaging with vocabulary on multiple levels. You're reviewing, spaced repetition, you're capturing new vocabulary, you're actively practicing and using vocabulary, you're passively absorbing vocabulary from content, and you're reflecting and organizing your learning. This multi-pronged approach is so much more effective than any single technique alone. Different techniques serve different purposes. Together, they create a comprehensive system that works with your brain. Here's something really important that I want to emphasize. The most effective vocabulary learning isn't something separate from your life. It's integrated into your actual life. Think about how native speakers learn vocabulary. They don't sit down and study. They live. They have conversations. They read things they're interested in. They watch shows and movies. They encounter words naturally as they go about their lives. As a language learner, you should try to mimic this as much as possible. Your vocabulary learning should be woven into your actual daily activities, not separate from them. Here are some concrete ways to do this. If you're interested in cooking, watch cooking shows in English. Read English recipes. Follow English cooking accounts on social media. Cook while listening to English podcasts. Naturally, you'll pick up all the vocabulary related to cooking. If you're interested in fitness, join English language fitness communities online. Follow fitness influencers who speak English. Watch English fitness videos. Read about nutrition and exercise in English. You'll naturally learn fitness vocabulary. If you're interested in travel, watch travel videos in English. Read travel blogs in English. Plan trips using English resources. Watch documentaries about places you want to visit. The travel vocabulary will naturally come to you. If you're interested in business, read business news in English. Listen to business podcasts. Read English business articles. Follow business leaders on social media. Business vocabulary will become part of your regular exposure. The point is, choose English learning activities that align with your actual interests and passions. Don't force yourself to learn vocabulary that you don't care about. Learn vocabulary about topics that genuinely interest you. That way, you're not adding extra studying to your life. You're just doing activities you enjoy, but in English. And here's something else that's powerful. Start thinking in English about topics you care about. If you love cooking, practice thinking about recipes in English. Describe what you're doing as you cook. Imagine conversations about cooking in English. This mental practice, this internal dialogue in English, is incredibly valuable. If you love sports, think about games and plays in English. Imagine conversations with sports fans in English. Read about sports in English. This exposure, even if it's just internal and mental, is valuable practice. And here's one more thing. Look for opportunities to actually use English in your daily life. If you have English-speaking friends, speak English with them. If you have a language partner, schedule regular conversations. If you have access to English language communities, whether online or offline, participate in them. Real conversation is one of the most powerful ways to learn vocabulary. When you're actually talking to someone, when the conversation is real and the stakes feel real, you're engaging with language in a completely different way than when you're studying alone. Let me spend a few minutes talking about the science behind why these techniques we've discussed actually work. Understanding the science can help you stay motivated and committed to your learning. First, let's talk about how memory works. Psychologists have identified different types of memory. Short-term memory is what you use to remember something for a few seconds. Working memory is what you use to hold information while you're using it. And long-term memory is where information is stored for extended periods. When you first learn a word, it goes into your short-term or working memory. But that information is fragile. It can disappear if you don't do something to move it into long-term memory. To move information from working memory to long-term memory, you need to engage in what psychologists call consolidation. This is a process where your brain reorganizes and stabilizes the information. Consolidation is strengthened through repeated exposure, through active use, through sleep, and through emotional engagement. This is why the techniques we've discussed work. Spaced repetition ensures that you encounter the word multiple times, triggering consolidation each time. Active recall forces you to actively retrieve the information, which strengthens consolidation. Emotional engagement, connecting words to feelings and personal experiences, also strengthens consolidation. Another important concept is encoding. This is about how the information is represented in your mind. Different types of encoding create stronger or weaker memories. Semantic encoding, understanding the meaning of something, creates stronger memories than just phonetic encoding, remembering what something sounds like. This is why context learning is so powerful. When you learn a word in context, you're engaging in deep semantic encoding. You're understanding not just what the word is, but what it means, how it's used, what situations it appears in. And this deep encoding creates a much stronger memory. Another important concept is elaboration. This is when you add more layers of meaning and connection to information. When you create mental images for words, you're elaborating. When you create your own sentences, you're elaborating. When you connect words to your personal experiences, you're elaborating. And elaboration significantly strengthens memory. When information has more connections, when it's connected to multiple other concepts, when it has multiple meanings and associations, it becomes much more memorable. There's also something called transfer-appropriate processing, which is the idea that the way you study should match the way you're going to use the information. If you're going to use words in speaking, you should practice speaking. If you're going to use words in writing, you should practice writing. If you're going to understand words when you hear them, you should practice listening. This is why our multimodal approach is so effective. We're using vocabulary through reading, writing, speaking, and listening. We're exposing ourselves to vocabulary through stories, through sentences, through conversations. This variety of modes ensures that the vocabulary is accessible to you in different contexts. Finally, there's something called the testing effect, which shows that testing yourself, trying to retrieve information from memory, is one of the most powerful ways to strengthen that information in memory. It's actually more powerful than studying or reviewing. This is why active recall is so important. When you quiz yourself on vocabulary, when you try to use words without looking them up, when you try to translate words from English without looking at the definition, you're engaging in testing, and that testing significantly strengthens your memory. Now, we've talked about a lot of techniques, and I want to say something important. Not all techniques work equally well for all people. Different people have different learning styles, different preferences, different brain wiring. Some people are more visual. They love creating mental images. They love seeing words written down. They learn well from videos and diagrams. If you're a visual learner, emphasize visualization, use colorful notes, watch videos, create mind maps. Some people are more auditory. They love hearing words. They love music. They learn well from listening. If you're an auditory learner, emphasize pronunciation, listen to podcasts, watch videos with audio, have conversations, use audio learning apps. Some people are more kinesthetic. They love moving, doing, experiencing. They learn well when they're physically engaged. If you're a kinesthetic learner, emphasize acting out words, writing by hand, having conversations, using your body to make gestures and movements associated with words. Some people are more logical. They love structure and organization. They learn well from understanding patterns and relationships. If you're a logical learner, emphasize categories and organization. Study word families, look for patterns and rules. Some people are more intuitive. They love context and big picture. They learn well from stories and real-world situations. If you're an intuitive learner, emphasize context learning, learn from stories, understand how words fit into real situations. The truth is, most people have a combination of these styles. And the most effective approach is to use a variety of techniques that appeal to different learning styles. That way, you're engaging your brain in multiple ways. But it's worth paying attention to which techniques feel most natural and enjoyable to you. If you find yourself enjoying certain techniques, if they feel easier or more effective, lean into those. Make them a bigger part of your routine. And for techniques that feel difficult or unnatural, don't avoid them, but maybe don't make them the main focus. Find a way to make them work for you. Maybe you don't naturally love visualization, but you could try creating silly, exaggerated mental images to make it more fun. The important thing is to build a vocabulary learning routine that's sustainable and enjoyable for you. If you hate your vocabulary learning routine, if it feels like a chore, you're not going to stick with it. But if it feels engaging, if it feels fun, if it feels like something that works for your brain and your life, you'll stick with it. and consistency is key. All right, we've covered so much ground in this episode. We've talked about techniques and strategies, the science behind learning, how to build a personal vocabulary system, how to overcome common mistakes, and how to integrate vocabulary learning into your actual life. So let me bring this all together and give you some final thoughts and encouragement. The truth is, mastering vocabulary is not about having a perfect memory. It's not about being naturally talented at languages. It's about using the right techniques, being consistent, and being patient. Anyone can become a strong vocabulary learner if they approach it strategically. And here's what I really want you to understand. You don't need to learn thousands of words to be a fluent English speaker. Studies show that knowing the 1,000 most common words in English gives you the ability to understand about 80% of everyday English. Knowing 3,000 words gives you about 95%. So you don't need to learn 50,000 words. You don't need to become a walking dictionary. You need to build a core vocabulary of high-frequency, high-value words. And then, you need to know how to figure out new words when you encounter them. Focus on this. First, learn the most common words thoroughly. These are words like the, and, to, you, I, and more specific words like make, get, go, come, think, know. These common words appear in almost every English conversation and text. Second, learn vocabulary related to your specific interests and needs. If you need English for work, learn work vocabulary. If you need English for travel, learn travel vocabulary. If you're interested in specific topics, learn vocabulary about those topics. Third, learn strategies for figuring out words you don't know. You can look for context clues. You can break words down into parts. You can make educated guesses based on similar words in your native language. You can look them up in a dictionary. Fourth, use the vocabulary you've learned actively and consistently. The more you use it, the more it becomes part of your automatic vocabulary. The more you can access it without thinking. And finally, be patient and celebrate your progress. Vocabulary building is a long-term project. You might not see dramatic improvement in a week or two, but if you stick with it, if you're consistent, if you use the techniques that work for you, you will see improvement over weeks and months. You'll be able to understand more of what you read and hear. You'll be able to express yourself more precisely and confidently. You'll feel less stuck when you encounter new words because you'll have strategies for figuring them out. And here's something that will blow your mind. You'll reach a point where vocabulary learning doesn't feel like learning anymore. It just feels like living. You're watching English shows because they're entertaining, not because you're studying. You're reading English articles because they interest you, not because you're forcing yourself to practice. You're having conversations with English speakers because you enjoy it, not because you're practicing. That's when you know you've really learned. When English becomes a natural part of your life. When vocabulary comes naturally because you're using it constantly. When learning feels like living. And that's absolutely possible for you, not in some distant future. It's possible starting today, starting now. If you begin building a consistent vocabulary learning routine, if you choose techniques that work for your brain and your life, if you stay committed to the process, you can absolutely achieve fluency and mastery of English vocabulary. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you again, make sure you're subscribed to this podcast so you never miss an episode. We're putting out new episodes every week with practical, powerful strategies for English learning. And please check out our full podcast playlist where you'll find all our episodes organized by topic. Whether you're learning vocabulary, working on grammar, improving pronunciation, or developing conversation skills, you'll find episodes to help you. Share this episode with anyone who's struggling with remembering English words. Share it with your friends who are learning English. Share it with your language learning community. Let's help as many people as possible overcome the vocabulary challenge. I'm so grateful you spent this time with me today. Learning a language is a journey, and I'm honored to be a part of your journey. You're investing in yourself. You're working towards communication skills that will open doors in your life. That's amazing, and I'm cheering you on. So go out there, learn some words, use them in conversations, make mistakes, and learn from them. Have fun with your learning. Celebrate your progress. And remember, you've got this. I believe in you, and you should believe in yourself. Until next time, keep practicing, keep pushing, and keep learning. Thank you so much for listening to the Vocabulary Breakthrough Podcast. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.